For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. When people ask who the worst teams of all time are in the Super Bowl era, this might be my number one answer. Because this team right here, the 1990 New England Patriots, were absolutely abysmal. Worse than the 1976 Buccaneers. Worse than the 2008 Lions. Worse than the 2017 Browns. No team had a worse season ever than the 1990 New England Patriots. Offensively, they were the worst team in football, averaging 11 points per game. Defensively, they were the second worst team in football, allowing an average of 28 points per game. Their point differential, a minus 265, is laughably bad and shows their ineptitude. And when you combine that with the harassment of Boston Herald reporter Lisa Olson, the Patriots were an absolute farce of a team to start the decade off. Yes, they won a game. Yes, they went 1-15. Teams have done worse. But when you consider everything that happened both on and off the field, I honestly have no clue how you can have a season worse than what the Patriots had in 1990. It was that bad. And there are obviously many reasons as to why the Patriots were terrible that year. It's not as though there's one solid, concrete reason for why they were maybe the worst team of all time. But a big part of it had to do with this man right here, head coach Rod Rust, who has a legitimate claim for being the worst head coach of all time. After being a respected defensive coordinator for over a decade, in 1990, he was hired to become the head coach of the team he spent 5 seasons as the defensive coordinator of, and made a Super Bowl with as an assistant, replacing outgoing head coach Raymond Berry. And to say that he was completely incompetent, inept, and in over his head would be the understatement of the century. And if you want an illustration of just how bad Rust was as the man in charge, and why he only lasted 1 season, you can point to a variety of incidents. But the one we're going to talk about today in particular was their nationally televised embarrassment against the Miami Dolphins. Because during that game, he refused to bench his starting quarterback, Marc Wilson, even though Wilson was practically begging to get benched. And his explanation for why he didn't make the switch truly makes no sense at all. Believe me, you're going to be scratching your head at this one, and why Rod Rust did absolutely nothing about it. Because this is the story behind what might just be, considering the circumstances, the dumbest loss of the 15 that the Patriots suffered during that horrible 1990 NFL season of theirs, one of the worst moments of Rod Rust's NFL coaching career, and one of the dumbest coaching controversies and quarterback controversies in New England Patriots history. Before I talk about what exactly Rod Rust did that left everyone scratching their head, and probably left Rust scratching his head when you hear his backwards explanation and rationale, we need some context to understand the importance of the game at hand, and how it was going. It's Thursday, October 18th, 1990. It's Week 7 of the NFL season, and we've got a battle on our hands in the AFC East at Joe Robbie Stadium between the New England Patriots and the Miami Dolphins. This is a big game for the Pats, and not just because this game is being nationally televised on TNT for the whole country to see as a Sunday night game on a Thursday, due to the NFL's desire to avoid playing on Sunday night during the World Series. The Patriots enter this game as an abysmal team, as they find themselves at 1-4 with the worst record in the conference and the worst point differential in football at minus 72. Now the good news for them was that their season was not over by any means. You could come back from a 1-4 start, especially in 1990, since the playoffs were expanded to 6 teams in each conference. If the Pats won this game, there was a very good chance that by the end of the week, they'd only be a game out of the playoffs. A 2-4 start to the season is not good by any means, but it's not an automatic death knell. A 1-5 start to the season, however, yeah, you're toast. Plain and simple, you're toast. And as you can tell from these lowlights, you have a pretty good idea of how this game turned out. Because when all was said and done, the Dolphins, who were expected to win, seeing as they entered the game as 10-point favorites, got the win, and took it on national TV by a final score of 17-10. The funny part is that the Dolphins played like crap this game. The Patriots defense did its job and deserved way better. Miami turned it over a whopping 5 times in the first half. The Dolphins only finished the game with 50 yards rushing on 27 carries, meaning that they were averaging well under 2 yards per carry. Dan Marino was held without a touchdown pass. There was no universe where you could possibly say that Miami played well. The Patriots won the turnover margin by 5, and in a normal world, would have gotten the win here. They should have been up by 3 possessions with how many chances they got, and should have blown the Dolphins out of the water. Instead, the Pats lost. Despite the Pats being up +5 in the turnover margin at halftime, the Patriots found themselves trailing 10-3. Despite having every opportunity under the sun to make Miami pay for its mistakes, the Patriots didn't do it. Far from it, actually. And a big reason why, as you can probably tell, was the play of their starting quarterback, the veteran and former Raider, Marc Wilson. Wilson's time in New England was nothing short of awful. He joined the team in 1989 and went 1-3 in his 4 starts, completing just 50% of his passes while throwing more interceptions than touchdowns. And in 1990, he was no better, as the 33-year-old had nothing left in the tank by this point. Entering the game against the Dolphins, he was already one of the worst starting quarterbacks in football, having lost each of his first 3 starts while throwing 2 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, and this game was no different. By the end of the first half, the Patriots had 2 first downs total. One of them came on a run, so Marc Wilson didn't do anything to contribute there. The other one came on a penalty, so Marc Wilson didn't do anything to contribute there. In fact, by the end of the first half, the Patriots had a grand total of 3 passing yards. That's it. 3. And it wasn't for lack of trying. If you were watching the game on your couch on that Thursday night and watching that abomination unfold, congratulations! You had just 3 fewer passing yards in the first half than Marc Wilson. By the time the game ended, Wilson played a monumental part in why the team lost. He fumbled the ball twice, stalling drives in the process. His pocket presence was abysmal, as he took 5 sacks. He completed less than 50% of his passes, going 18 for 38, and a lot of these throws were high percentage throws that most quarterbacks can hit. This was a game that, with any competent quarterback, or even a below-average quarterback, the Patriots win, and win quite handily, I might add. They just needed someone who was a completely inept at everything that a quarterback is required to do, and they win the game. But as you can tell, Marc Wilson was atrocious. Which raises the obvious question. Why the heck didn't head coach Rod Rust make the switch on this guy right here? I mean, you're seeing the lowlights. Why not change quarterbacks? Especially when you've got a veteran quarterback like Steve Grogan on the bench who, while not good by this point in his career, by any stretch of the imagination, can still do a few things and can't possibly be any worse than Wilson. Even Marc Wilson himself was confused as to why he wasn't yanked from the game, and he had no idea what his coach was doing. Said Wilson, "I don't think I've ever played worse. Unbelievable. That's how bad I was." He then added, "It was a struggle. If I had done anything in the first half, we would have won the ball game. But I was unbelievable. Absolutely terrible. The first half? I don't know. I just forgot how to throw the football. I thought it might be coming out at halftime, and frankly, I don't think I would have blamed head coach Rod Rust. I was playing that poorly." Wilson admitted that on this day, he had no idea how to throw a football. And the numbers don't lie, and the eye test doesn't lie. As one writer said, Wilson was throwing like Jose Canseco, knucklers out in the flat to his receivers, bouncers to the feet of his receivers, and sailing passes over all his receivers' heads. When a quarterback is flat out admitting that he can't throw the football, and when you're losing a game at halftime in which your defense has won the turnover margin by 5 and you've scored 3 points, why not make the switch? What do you have to lose? Already, this looks really bad for Rod Rust, and looks like he has no idea what he's doing from a coaching perspective. But there's a reason this is still remembered more than 3 decades later for how absolutely insane it was. If Rust gave a halfway decent or logical explanation as to why he kept his quarterback in, this story isn't remembered all these years later. So that raises the question, what was the explanation that Rod Rust gave as to why he didn't pull the trigger on his obviously struggling and inept quarterback, Marc Wilson? Well, he was thinking about it. This man right here, Rod Rust, was absolutely thinking about it. After the defense forced 5 turnovers in the first half, and the Pats were trailing and scored 3 points total off of it, he admitted that he was considering making the switch to the veteran Steve Grogan. But he decided not to do that. The reason why? I didn't want to start Steve Grogan for the first series of the second half. I wanted him to have a little time to throw and warm up. So you didn't play Grogan over Wilson in the second half because he didn't have enough time to warm up? I'm sorry, what? I've heard a lot of dumb explanations and justifications for things before on this channel, but this might take the cake. This genuinely might take the cake. Number 1, how long do you think it takes for a guy to warm up? It's not like you need 8 hours to warm up. You just throw some passes on the sideline, get loosened up, stretch a bit, and boom, you go into the game. There are plenty, and I mean it, plenty of teams that have switched quarterbacks in the middle of the game, no problem. It is not this foreign concept. And you know when the most common time to do it is? That's right, halftime. You tell Grogan he's starting the second half. He goes out there and has about 7 minutes to throw and warm up, and he's good to go. Rust is making this seem like he was a manager for a baseball team deciding to take one of his starting pitchers out of the bullpen in the middle of the game. Grogan can absolutely do it. In fact, we literally saw him do it during this game right here last season. Remember this one? This was the 1989 season finale between the New England Patriots and the Los Angeles Rams. And I did a video about this game a long time ago, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. In that game, Marc Wilson looked atrocious, going 2 for 8 with 16 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception, and a passer rating of 0.0, which is your rating if you literally don't show up. It cannot go any lower than that, folks. Grogan relieved him off the bench and ended up throwing for over 300 yards, as he helped the Pats erase a 14-point deficit to almost win the game and pull off the stunning upset, thereby keeping the Rams out of the playoffs. So Grogan is more than capable of doing this. Number 2, okay, so you didn't want him to start for the first series of the second half. You wanted to give Grogan more time to warm up, as if you think you're defrosting a car in minus 50-degree weather. Let's roll with that for a second. The first series of the second half, you didn't score any points. You didn't cross midfield. You got 1 first down, which came courtesy of 3 straight running plays, so Wilson didn't do anything there. And the drive ended, shocker, with a Marc Wilson duck and an incomplete pass. Why didn't you put Grogan in for the next series? How does that make any sense? It's not as though you touched the ball 1 time in the second half. You touched it quite a few times. And if 7 minutes isn't enough to warm up Grogan, when you combine the length of the drive you went on and Miami's next drive, you're looking at over 15 minutes of time to warm up. Do you not think that's enough time to warm up and get ready? If that's not enough time, then let's be frank, nothing is. So that explanation makes no sense at all. And number 3, if that made any sense, and if that was even the slightest bit justifiable, then logically, we'd be seeing Steve Grogan warm up on the sideline. If the reason for not playing Grogan was that you wanted to, but he needed time to warm up, then you'd be having him warm up and giving him that time. But you know what we didn't see at any point during the contest? At any point during halftime? Or at any point in the second half? That's right, Steve Grogan warming up. Because according to reporters, and according to the footage, Steve Grogan touched the ball a grand total of 0 times on the sideline during the game. At no point was he warming up. At no point did the coaches instruct him to throw the ball and get loosened up. So let me get this straight. You said that you were going to bench Wilson for Grogan, but you decided not to do it on the first series because Grogan needed time to warm up. Yet you never actually had Grogan warming up, and that doesn't explain the 10,000 other series you had in the second half as to why you didn't make the switch. Does your head hurt from that? Does your head hurt from all of that and from trying to follow and understand and process the logic? Because mine sure does, Mine sure freaking does. It's like a kid saying, I can't take the test today because I need more time to study. So the teacher gives you an extra week and you don't open up a single book. That makes no sense at all. Russ said after the game, if I felt that Steve Grogan would have been the difference in this game, then I would have started him. If that was bad judgment on my part, then I have to live with it. Buddy, that wasn't bad judgment. Bad judgment is when you were debating whether or not to bring a coat to work because you thought it was going to get warmer as the day progressed, but for whatever reason, it didn't. So now you're cold throughout the day. This has crossed beyond the realm of bad judgment into something else entirely and into something completely different. This is advanced bad judgment. This is the kind of stuff that makes you wonder if you're all there. Nothing, and I truly mean it, nothing about what Ron Russ did here made any sense, and how he tried to justify it somehow made it even worse. If he said, I don't believe in switching quarterbacks midway through the game, I don't agree with it, but that makes sense. If he said, there were certain things that Wilson could do against this Miami defense that Grogan can't, and I was hoping that he would flip a switch and start doing those things, I don't agree with it, but that makes sense. If he said, I saw Grogan run the offense in practice, and I saw Wilson run the offense in practice, and based on what I saw, I don't think Grogan would have given us a better chance. Again, I don't agree with it, but that makes sense. There's at least a thought process there. But for him to say, I was going to make the switch, but I decided not to because I needed Grogan to warm up, and then have him not warm up? Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. After the game between these two teams behind me right here, Ron Russ developed somewhat of a brain, not saying much, but somewhat of a brain, as he decided to start Steve Grogan the following week against the eventual AFC champion Buffalo Bills. Now, it didn't make a difference. Grogan completed less than 50% of his passes, he threw 2 interceptions, and the Pats lost the game 27-10. But it was probably better than whatever the heck Marc Wilson would have done, I'll tell you that much. Neither Wilson nor Grogan would find themselves in the NFL again after the 1990 season. So this was just a sad way for both of those veteran quarterbacks to go out. Oh, and as for Ron Russ, after he got fired by the Patriots in 1990, I know it's going to sound hard to believe, and I know this can be shocking, but no team hired him to be their head coach. You would think after the Pats let him go, that teams would be lining out the door in order to make him their next head coach, but I guess not. I wonder why. The Patriots had a lot of awful seasons in their franchise's history. The 1992 season with Dick McPherson as head coach was brutal, especially because he flat out admitted during one game that he made a decision thinking that the score was one thing, when in reality, it was another. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. The 1981 season, where they went 2-14 and just completely floundered after being one of the favorites to make the Super Bowl, was brutal. Any season under Cleve Rush was a train wreck and a half, and you can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Granted, they've obviously had a lot of great seasons, but their awful seasons were really awful, and 1990 might be the worst of them all, thanks in no small part to the awful coaching of Ron Russ as exhibited throughout the entire season, and especially this game against the Miami Dolphins. Because during that game against Miami, Steve Grogan and the Patriots couldn't shake off the rust, both literally and figuratively. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.